an Associate Vice President and Executive Director of the Web Science Institute at the University of Southampton. Welcome. Big round of applause for her. Then we have Deborah McGuinness, who's the Tetherless World Senior Constellation Chair, Professor of Computer Science, Cognitive Science, and Industrial and Systems Engineering at RPI. Give her a big hand. Then we have Noshir Contractor, Jane and William White Professor of Behavioral Sciences at the McCormick School of Engineering and Professor of Management and Organizations at Northwestern. Big applause. Wei-Han Wang, who's an Assistant Professor of Computer Science at USC. Big round of applause. And last but not least, we have Ricardo Baeza Yates, Director of Research at the Institute for Experimental AI at Northeastern. Wonderful. So welcome. After 2 days of...
Did you introduce yourself?
Oh, you're right. I'm Agnes Horvath. Thank you. I'm Assistant Professor of Communication and Computer Science at Northwestern. And I'm delighted to be here. It's not too common to have the opportunity to ask such a distinguished panel about some of the questions that most of us are thinking about after a 2-day conference. This was the 15th edition of the Web Science Conference, so this is a teenager conference at this point. We saw some of that capriciousness in some of the technical issues, but hey, we'll survive this, we'll get through it. But the first thing that I'd like to do at this occasion is to invite everyone on the panel to reflect on the first 15 years of this conference. What were the main achievements? What comes to mind? I know some of you are current general chairs, others of you have been general chairs and have been involved with this, and some of you will be strongly involved, heavily involved in the future. So in a reflective manner, what comes to mind?
That's an easy question. We're here.
Oh, yeah.
I always liken to... it's very interesting that some people have been referring to this as the future of the web panel, and it's in the program as the future of web science. And of course, the two are very connected. So we'll come back to the future, I know. But the key thing was that when we started the whole web science project, and I will say again what I always say, I hate two things about the name web science. One is web and the other is science. Yeah, okay, so everyone's obviously heard that before and didn't want to, but we didn't know what to call it. And of course, actually, when you look, one of the achievements is there's a lot of web science in the web conference. I've been coming to web conferences since 1994. And they were then, and still are to some extent, incredibly technical conferences, full of geeky people that like talking about building software systems, and there's very often in papers and sessions absolutely no talk about people, the social consequences. Now, actually, the two keynotes we've had today were all about that in a sense. They were web science type keynotes, and the key thing when we were trying to launch web science in 2006 or whenever it was to bring disciplines together to study the ecosystem that is the web from a socio-technical perspective. And it was a bit like, Nosh was at the first web science conference because he was the keynote, weren't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you there?
Yeah.
In Athens?
Yes.
That was crazy, wasn't it?
I know, it was insane.
It was absolutely insane. But
Yes, that's right.
so I always used to say, when I talk about it, it was like jumping off a cliff and not knowing whether you were going to fly, because we had no idea whether anyone was going to pick up on this idea. Remember, that was the era, it was almost before Facebook, it was before Twitter, it was before any of this social media. And so before Web 2.0, effectively. And we were forecasting that this was coming down the pipe, and we had to worry about things like privacy, security, trust. And people said to us, but your man, what's that got to do with the web? You can't imagine people saying that today, but that's what they used to say 15 years ago. And so I think for me, we survived the Athens conference, despite everything. Strikes, our Greek hosts running a parallel conference that was in Greek. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But the point was we've survived and we're here. And I have to say that Web Science still tries to, in my view, be an interdisciplinary conference, which is very hard. It's very hard to run it in the midst of a web conference. But the key two things, my takeaway messages for this question. One, there's a lot of web science now in the main web conference. There's, I forget the names of the tracks, but social media and all those things. And secondly, the quality of papers in the Web Science Conference has gone up and up and up. So it's quite a mature subject. And of course, there's a lot of web science goes on. People don't call it web science, they call it lots of other things. That doesn't matter to me. It's the socio-technical study of these highly connected systems that Bob Metcalfe was talking about last night.
Well, that was great. Just to add a couple of things and highlight, I think it's only gotten more interdisciplinary. So there's a famous bubble chart that had like a lot of bubbles.
That was Nigel's bubble chart.
Yeah, well, but we kind of,
Butterfly.
yeah, we adopted it and strongly supported it. And I think there aren't really like tiny little bubbles. A lot of those bubbles really are first-class citizens, in particular the social-oriented ones and the people-oriented ones. And I think that's a direction that we will continue to grow in. And actually, if we don't grow in, we're going to shrink. So I think that was very important. And I think an emergence of the notion of social machines came out, I think, of the web science world. And the notion of web observatories emerged. Hasn't taken off as much as I would like to see, but it emerged and it's still growing.
Excellent.
So this is a good pause to reflect on some of these developments. So for those who may not be familiar, my tagline on web science is how web is shaping society and how society in turn is shaping the web. And so if you take that as a very broad sort of mission, one of the things that I think we've done better is in trying to use the web as an observatory, not only for what's happening on the web, but also to understand social behavior. Back in 2012, Duncan Watts wrote an article where he said, finally, the web is the telescope that social science is needed. And that is true, but I think that it's a telescope that in the act of observing changes society as well. And I think so it's become much more important today for us to understand that because the web is evolving technologically, not just based on being influenced by society and influencing society in turn, but also because of all these technological changes. If the web was a spacecraft, imagine we are going on this space mission and at the same time constantly re-engineering and rebuilding different parts of it along the way while still continuing to move forward. And that's a challenge that we've already experienced, but we are going to have to continue to look at as we move forward in this space.
Okay. Yeah, first, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm very honored to be part of this panel. I think among the panelists, I'm most junior, so in this community. First, I want to briefly introduce myself and then discuss my perspectives about the future of web science. So yes, I'm from University of Southern California, and my research interests are software engineering with a focus on developing automated testing techniques for web applications to solve security, sustainability, and reliability issues on the web. So during my PhD, my research was focused on web advertisement. For example, developing techniques to prevent malicious advertisement and define policies to protect the user information being leaked, and also designing techniques to retain ad revenues for websites. And recently, my research has shifted to WebAssembly, which is a new type of a client-side web programming language. And this WebAssembly technology has just started being supported by the web browsers since late 2017. The goal of this technique is to improve the performance of JavaScript and to enable high-performance computations on the web, such as games, virtual reality, image recognition, and scientific computations. And another goal of this technique is to port existing programs written in a different language, such as C, C++, Rust, and Go, to the web by compiling them to the WebAssembly. So this allows for existing programs written in a different language to be run on the web without the need to re-implement them. So, this is a little bit about myself. Regarding the future of web science, I want to highlight several challenges introduced by the current web infrastructure, as well as several emerging interdisciplinary opportunities. So the current web applications are built upon the integration of different components provided by multiple parties. So, for example, these website developers leverage dedicated third-party libraries to deliver professional services, for example, the Google Ad Service. This programming model has many benefits, such as flexibility and modularity. However, it also comes with several inherent challenges. The first one is how to ensure the transparency. And so in this integrated environment, for example, how to ensure that the user's data is collected, cannot be shared by all the parties. And so I'm off to the topic. Okay, so how to actually ensure users' data is being shared safely. And also, there's other issues, for example, the reliability issue. Essentially, ensuring the correctness of web programs delivered by multiple parties is challenging. For example, when an error happens, and so it is difficult to locate where the problem is, because these defects can exist in some third-party libraries where the internals are not accessible. Mm-hmm. And so I also want to discuss briefly about some emerging.
I think we're going to come back
to questions about that. So
come
thank
back to
you.
that.
Let's let
sure.
Ricardo bring his remarks about the more historical aspects of the conference, and then we'll have a full round of challenges, opportunities, and future developments. Thank you.
Yes, talking about transparency, following the recommendations published today by the Federal Trade Commission, I should inform you that I'm a robot. So don't take my opinions too seriously if you choose to believe me, okay? So I think I haven't been in all web science conferences, only in a few. First as invited speaker, I organized the last one, so maybe 3 or 4. But I think that the main accomplishments I've already mentioned, but for me will be to have a different view of what is web science, not from the computer science only, but also from other disciplines. So you see a lot of social science, but I would like to see even more, and I guess that will be part of the next question. But still I feel that's not enough. So I think this was the first stage, and we need to get to a next stage. And I will abbreviate so because we have a lot of other questions.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So that brings us to the next question, which is more around the opportunities and challenges for the community now and in the near future.
Okay. Yes, what I would like to see, and because we have some challenges, especially because of generative AI today, is try to answer some more fundamental questions about how we use the web. For example, if you go to, and I have done research in the past about search engines, For example, the correlation between what people write, say the content of the web, and what people is looking for is very low, like 0.2. So basically, people is looking for things that are not in the web yet, maybe, or that are not that important for other people in the web. And that means that a lot of content in the web is not seen. In our research we did, we showed that an upper bound was like 35% and a lower bound was 1%. So the question is, how much of the web, that could be even 5%, let's take only 100 billion pages, that means that at least 5 billion pages are not seen in months. So maybe we need to align what people want in the content to what people is writing. And maybe many people that could write are not writing. So I think that I would like to see more fundamental research on how to align the web as a service to people that are looking for information. Of course, we know that the incentives for other people, like some companies, it's not the same. And that will be very hard to do it in social networks, for example. Another challenge will be, in the near future, a lot of content will be generated by AI. And I'm not so worried about how much of that content is false, because a lot will be false, and we had a keynote about that. I'm worried that it will be much harder to know what is human and what is not human, because we need to learn from human content. Otherwise, we will get like a fixed point problem where basically AI is learning from AI and doesn't learn anything new. And we have that problem in other applications too. So these, I think, there are these two challenges I would like to know more, like how the content of the web is used and how we can align the content with the needs. And the second is what is human or not later.
Yes. So yeah, I also agree I also agree that using this AI and also this machine learning, actually combined with this web science, there will be a lot of challenges as well as research opportunities. So from my perspective, I think this AI and machine learning can be used to help web development. And because these techniques can be used for many software engineering tasks. For example, we can help people to generate programs from code examples. And these AI techniques also can be used for performance profiling and optimization, and also can be used for program comprehension and summarization. And these actually are already happening, but I also see there's still a lot of room for improvement. And another observation for the future opportunity is that I see there are more needs for the collaboration between web scientists and experts in other domains. So taking some example, for example, the biological scientist. So there are these algorithms and applications developed to analyze these biological sequence data to perform some computational task. For example, this multiple sequence alignment. And traditionally, these tasks are done by the remote server. So actually, the biology scientists, they need to upload these data, like a DNA sequence data, to a remote server. And nowadays, actually, there's more need to running these data locally, because these data could be potentially sensitive. So people do not want to upload the sensitive data to the remote server. So in this kind of situation, the deployment in a remote server and locally may have underneath different implementations. Then when these errors happen or discrepancy happen, so this requires a collaboration between the web scientists and tooling developers, as well as actually experts in other domains to actually identify and fix those problems. Yeah.
I'm going to focus my comments more in the area of social science and how this has changed social science in a way that we are now asking questions that we did not ask before. A lot of what we've done previously was look at the web, as I said, is an observatory, a telescope to see how social interactions occur. I plead guilty. I spent a lot of time looking at how people interact in online games. And mostly the technology was seen as a conduit for interaction at scale in a lot of different ways, whether it was user-generated content, social media, etc. But one of the new things that I think is an opportunity and a challenge for social sciences and in web science in particular is that we are now living in an increasingly algorithmically infused society. So this was a part of the phrase that was a title of a paper that Claudia Wagner and several of us wrote in Nature a couple of years ago. And when you think about an algorithmically infused society, humans are no longer acting on their own. The algorithms are agents with a lot of agency in the system. ChatGPT is an example of that, but we've had recommender systems in the past, and a lot of that is increasing now. How to understand human behavior when you have agents in the social system that are non-human is a really interesting and important challenge for us to understand in this particular context. So I'd say that, I think we need to think about those issues at a very high level in a lot of different aspects of society.
I also wrote down, my perspective is coming from a semantic web provenance research perspective, but also from running, an earlier version of web science, 7 years ago or something. So my first one was exploring evolving web usage in the face of large language models. And so that might be the non-human large language models putting information out there, but it also might be the human usage of the large language models in collaboration with humans. So, large language models have changed all of our lives, and I think they're just going to continue. So seeing how the web usage changes in the face of that is one. Another one that I wrote down is observing and facilitating useful collaboration. I wanted that modifier because I think most of us are observing that collaboration is currently growing and needs to grow more. And so I would like to observe what people are inherently doing and what we can do to facilitate that. Another one is studying the evolution of data usage as things like Twitter change their data usage policies. And as people massively leave Twitter and move over to Mastodon or other places, how does that change everything? And the last one that I wrote down was studying community formation and the evolution. So, I was really impressed when I saw Wikipedia coming out. One, I didn't think it was going to take off. And two, I was struck by the governance that emerged. And so I think governance will emerge here, but studying how that evolves should be very interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, David Rand about, I'm looking at Lila sitting there. I always talk about the Wikipedia governance model as something that's evolved, that is a way to manage. It's a closed system, I know, in a way, although it links out, but there must be ways we can pick up on that to do the sort of thing David Rand was talking about, but on a large scale, where we're sort of marking ourselves. And this is what Bob Metcalfe said yesterday, and I agreed with him, although of course it's dangerous to agree with Bob Metcalfe because he's famously wrong all the time, but he clearly isn't, right? He clearly isn't wrong on the big things. And he said, the answer to we have to take some responsibility ourselves. And I'll also come back and then swing round to where I was going in the first place, to thinking about social social credit system, the Chinese. No, the social market, where they market people socially. What's it called? The credit. Social credit system, yeah, I thought so. Now, as we say in our book, which I'll put, there's some flyers out there, Kieran and I, in our 4 Internets book, the Chinese model of, and there are a lot of people from China at this conference now, and I'm struck by how all the applications people use are about the US and possibly a bit of Europe, right? You come here and it's all about US data, but it's a huge mix of people from all over the world in these rooms. And so I'm always struck by that. And of course, part of it is that we can do this stuff in the West, and you couldn't, when we had I can't remember, it was a paper yesterday about looking at US presidents, and was it I can't remember what the paper's about now, the jet lag's kicking in, but there was stuff about Biden and Trump, and you couldn't do that in China, right? And talk about President Xi in that way, okay? And also, we know that, of course, with the keynote this morning, Diraj, who didn't talk about TikTok, but we know there are all sorts of issues about TikTok and who has the access to the data. But in the West, let's call it that, where we value freedom of speech and we say we're democracies, we're faux democracies or whatever we are these days. We could never accept a world where we knew the government had access to all our data. But that doesn't mean there isn't a way to have some sort of social credit system, right? It doesn't have to, it's all to do with the culture of the world that you live in, where, people call each other out for bad behavior, as you would in the real world. But how you translate that, and I think this is a huge web science issue, because it's why is the behavior, where are we different when we're online, and where are we the same in terms of our behavioral? It's a bit about what you were saying, and I think this is so important for us to study as we go forward. And I'll just finish with, when you think technically about where we're going, Tim is pushing ahead or pushing forward with Solid, which is his architecture for empowering us to have control over what happens to our data. I call it, can he achieve the Tim flip? Because it's a huge flip to imagine moving from the world we're in now to a world where we don't share our data. Instead of when we get onto Google or Amazon or whatever, we tick their terms and conditions. The flip would be they tick our terms and conditions, right? That's the essence of the flip. Can we achieve that? Right? Is that possible? And that's really what Tim's trying to do with Solid. The Web3 movement, and the definition, definition is the wrong word. What we mean by Web3 has changed hugely since people started. I'm not going to go through that now. I've just written a paper about it. But it's all sort of about us managing our own the data that's about us. It's not all personal data, but data related to us. How is that going to work? And then we're moving into this. I'm going to finish, almost finish, right, 2 more points, with a Bob Metcalfe. I think we're in a huge hype cycle with LLM, and that when we come back in 2 or 3 years' time, it will be quite passé, right? Because it isn't what we know, its flaws, the flaws, and the huge amounts of work that's got to be done to make them actually useful systems. Yeah, and there are, of course, the scare stories, which may well be true about all the misinformation that is going to be produced. We as a society have to work out a way to handle that, and I think that's a major issue for webs. And the 2 keynotes today have addressed that. So I think we're in a hype cycle. We talked about AI winters. Well, I think we're in an AI scorcher at the moment, and I wonder if it's going to burn out a bit until we actually can see how we can improve the systems, both for the good of the world, us as humanity, but also improve them technically. And so I just want to finish by the fact that I started with this really. The web is about, as Bob said, there's 60% of the world now have access to the internet. I had an amazing experience in India a month ago, looking at what's happening as the internet spreads to rural India, to people who cannot read and write. and they're using the technology in ways we would never have conceived of. With barcodes on pieces of paper because they haven't got and that's in a market square, you know, you can use your phone and put it on the barcode and pay the person selling the coconut or whatever in the market. It's just amazing what they're doing. And so the 40% of the people to come onto the internet will have a very different view of this world to us. We learnt about the web, we already had computers and then we had mobile phones. They will learn about it in a completely different way. And I think when we come back in 30 years' time, well, A, I won't be here because I'll be 100 in 30 years' time if I'm still here. But you youngsters will be. And that I think will we talk about the web and the internet in the way we do today? I very much doubt it. But the technology foundation we will still be using. So I think on that note of 30 years' time is I'll be 100, I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. So these are very valuable hints for what we could be studying. And I think since there are quite a few students, early career researchers in the room, for some of whom, and I learned this in the break and I just didn't register this, for some of these students, this is the very first in-person conference they are attending. So it's massive. And I think with them in mind, out of all the great ideas that we heard about here and the great opportunities, what should they be taking on? What are the opportunities for them, the beginners in this community who want to do more, who are excited about the web science movement, this field? What do we suggest them to do?
Oh, I'll start. Right. That's a really good question. I won't speak for long on this, but I think it's a really good question. And you could sort of say, well, in 30 years' time, it'll all be virtual. I think we've proved that's not going to be true. Yeah? I mean, look, the metaverse, I hate talking about the metaverse, there isn't one minute, but whole, virtual worlds, they never quite reach their potential in terms of, we're not ready yet to walk around with, well, I'm certainly not, goggles on my face all the time. The youngsters might be. But the point that they're coming to we're all coming here in person because we need that social interaction, I think is so amazing. So although we are all inventing the technology and using the technology that enables us to connect virtually, we still want to connect in person. And I think that's, we in a way, we've run an experiment using the pandemic, and that's my conclusion. Well, it's not a conclusion, really, it's just how it is.
I call myself Dr. Hybrid now because, and that's even before the explosion of LLMs. I mean, I rarely use a single technology to do something. So, and I think that will just continue. So enabling hybrid solutions between computers and humans humans to humans, I think that is part of the future. I think also disinformation is an issue for a while. I think there will be tools and services to help it, and there's tremendous opportunities there. There's tremendous need. I also think that something like Solid, the decentralized web, so the decentralized web is emerging, something like the usage of smart contracts, whether we'll see that phrase. I've learned through the years, don't get addicted to any particular phrase, because actually you're going to have to reinvent it to publish the next paper anyway. But something like smart contracts that I tell you when you can and can't use my data or my whatever I'm putting out there, and something like data lockers, something like what Tim is pushing, is needed and will emerge. And there's plenty of PhD theses in that. I've been doing explanation for decades, and I think we are just going to continue to see the need for all sorts of explanations. So there's tremendous thesis opportunities there, and startup opportunities as well. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. So I have one process and 3 content recommendations for our early career scholars here. From a process point of view, I think more and more it's becoming clear that you are going to have to decide one particular area that you're going to specialize in. So there is this knowledge of the T model of education, where you get deep expertise in one particular area, whatever it is, whichever field it is, but that you also then have to have the horizontal top part of the T, which is have some level of insight and understanding about a lot of other disciplines, or at least some other disciplines. And that's something that you start while you're in grad school. Often, if you're working in interdisciplinary labs, that automatically becomes easy because you're working with students, not just instructors or professors, but students in other disciplines. And I think that that's something you should be conscious. But don't make the mistake of trying to be a specialist in everything, because life is too short. So you need to decide what your area of expertise, where you want to advance, and then build across in other areas. That's the process. Content-wise, there are so many different ideas. I'll just throw three. One that Wendy mentioned, which I had in my notes but didn't get to, is the global aspects of this. We are very, very parochial when we look at this. I was at that conference I was at the workshop with Wendy in Bangalore, the Web Science for Development, and it's so eye-opening to see anywhere in the world how varied prevalence of the internet is, and the use of the internet, and the perceptions of the internet, and the norms and the policies. And we really have to recognize that we are living in a very small bubble when we look at, Dheeraj this morning said he's a Twitterologist, and all of us are a little more than that, but not much more than that in terms of what we do. One of the things I would encourage us, if you take social science as your vertical spike in the T model that I was saying, understanding digital skills is something we've talked about for a while. Esther Hargitay, a former colleague of Agnes and mine, has written extensively about how the digital divide is not just about whether you have a laptop or internet access, it's about the skills we possess. Today, she has also been on the forefront of moving not from just digital skills, but algorithmic skills, and seeing the extent to which we are going to be good at that. An example, is ChatGPT, the use of ChatGPT, is it going to reduce the gap between the best students and the best scholars and the not so good scholars, or is it actually going to widen the gap? You could say that if you're a good prompt engineer, you might use ChatGPT. The best could make it much better, and those who are not so good may not, but it'll increase the gap between them. On the other hand, you could say, well, ChatGPT is going to flatten the playing field for everyone. It's an open question. And so I think that issues like this, and the last point I'll make is tied to the talk that Bob Metcalf gave to some extent, and also the question that Wendy asked Dheeraj this morning about, to what extent is the supply of misinformation and the demand of misinformation both important? And I was reminded the Atlantic in 2020, December, the issue that in the Atlantic that says the year that changed the internet, it said reducing the supply of misinformation doesn't eliminate the demand. And the demand of misinformation is a social science question. Why is it that we crave that so much? And trying to understand that is something that if you're interested in social science, you would be interested in pursuing.
Okay. Yeah, I think others have already give excellent recommendations. So yeah, my recommendation would be just very brief. So I think, like I mentioned, the several inherent challenges within this web infrastructure. Actually, I want to highlight this because this is actually challenging to solve for this moment, because the infrastructure what we have actually provides this modularity and flexibility, but actually this also introduces this transparency issue as well as this trust concerns. And actually solving this problem, I think is very challenging. So yeah, because we already have this infrastructure and already have actually so many web applications deployed, so whether to completely change this, the data, how it is delivered, shared, or actually thinking of, I think this some solution that we can get inspiration from actually other domain, like in the real world, how this protection should be done. Like for example, this banking system, so like having different parties and how to ensure this security. And some other challenge or opportunity could be, for example, accessibility. I think, right. Other also mentioned about accessibility. Actually, the data, whether the data should be shared among different parties and these sensitive data for these language models. I think this accessibility also can relate to some new type of devices like these IoT devices. And also it could be referred to like people with special needs. And for example, people who cannot actually access to these pointing devices, but can only using keyboard. So whether our web application are accessible to people who can only actually using keyboard. Yeah, okay.
I have some ideas, but I don't know in which order is the right order. So I want to complement some things that the panelists have said. So I think the most high level, meta level is that related to what Deborah said. I love hybrid things. Also, I believe that there's nothing that is the best solution for everything because it depends on the context, depends on the user and many things. So one thing that we should keep in mind is that when we are using these new AI technologies, we should try to think about how to complement us and not how to replace us. And I think because that's something that people get afraid, or this person will take my job. The truth is that the person that will take your job will be the one that understands the technology, so it's about the skills, like Noshir said. So I don't believe that most of the jobs will take by just, let's say, generative AI. And I would like to stay with generative AI because it's not only about languages, it's about images, it's about videos, it's about many other things that will be generated automatically. So let's think about how we can make us better and not how to replace us. Regarding that, I think that prompt engineering will die very soon because the same technology will be used to basically generate the prompt. So in some sense, this will be good for search engines because now we are doing 2-word stupid queries, but soon will be the intermediate that will generate like a small document that will be like a prompt to search much better documents, and then we will basically try to solve problems that before we didn't know how to solve in search, but now we can think on solving them. Basically, how to take what we have in our mind to basically what we should input, and the input will be basically generated by a model. So Wendy talked about the data flip. I think also that's a very interesting opportunity because here we can use zero knowledge proof, and zero knowledge proof for the people that don't know, sorry I cannot explain it now, but basically I can prove to you that something is true without sharing the data. And that means that if we really do that flip, we have at least 2 benefits. One, you get true data about people, not a prediction. I mean, today people is just collecting data to predict us. Much better to basically know exactly what the person wants to share. And this is a win-win situation because many people would like to share, for example, a real hobby and not sharing the real identity. And we don't need that, for example, to have a business on that hobby. And today we can do that. At least we can check the proofs in online time. This is something that happened in the last 3-4 years. We still cannot construct the proofs in online time, but maybe in the near future that will be possible too. And my last opportunity will be related to what Noshir said, or maybe it was implicit in his ideas. I think we need to try to reduce the inequality because the inequality will grow, will not decrease. And the inequality is in many aspects. So we have access, so 3 billion people that don't have internet. Some of them shouldn't have internet, so I don't know how many there are, maybe 2 billion, but still in the 1 billion that doesn't have because they're trying to survive and not trying to see a TikTok, we need to see what is the best way for them to become part of this world. I don't think the way we do it today is the right way. Second, we have skills issues, so the difference between the people that can use these new technologies and not, that's a big skill gap. Another very important one related to language models now is language. Less than 5% of the language have a Wikipedia. Yes, it's true that most of the people talk one of these 5% of the language, but still we don't want to kill the diversity we have on the planet. We need to, in some way, keep the other 6,500 languages that don't have enough language resources. For example, only in India there are 22 official languages, and only 10 of them have enough NLP resources to do something meaningful with language models. But the total number of languages, if my memory doesn't fail, is like 600. So there is a power law all the time in all these things, and we need to not increase the exponent of the power law, we need to decrease it. And this is like also another challenge that we have.
Thank you so much. I'll invite you to have a closing round now where you make any predictions, whether for 30 years, 5 years, 10 years, and this is also an opportunity to add anything that we didn't get a chance to talk about. While you are collecting your thoughts, I will also ask those in the audience to think about your questions. Feel free to signal to me. We can have a break where we answer your questions between the panelists. There's a question right there already, so I'll give you the microphone.
Thank you very much. That was a very insightful panel. So my question is mostly specifically about the semantic web or knowledge graphs as we refer to nowadays. So how do you see semantic web playing a role in the world of AI going forward? Because as we see a lot of like advanced AI models using machine learning and deep learning, and also we have knowledge graphs maturing like over time. But how do you see knowledge graphs or semantic web playing a role in the world of AI going forward? Thank you.
On? Yes. So this is close to my heart, given that actually my colleague in the, oh, she's not there. She just referred to me as the mother of the semantic web. We talk about the fathers. You know, there's many candidates for the father, but there aren't that many candidates for the mother. So you know, I don't see a better silver bullet than the links and the semantics that are encoded in knowledge graphs for making those connections. So large language models are going to continue to improve, you know, more training data with some input like Khan training, OpenAI's ChatGPT on how to work with math for 20 hours radically improved its math capabilities. But it's not going to solve everything without understanding something about what the terms mean and how those relationships fit. So I think that these knowledge graphs are going to continue to be used to kind of augment around the edges. So they might help you create a good prompt. They might help you refine and check the answers that something like ChatGPT says authoritatively. By the way, ChatGPT said I won the Turing Award. Well, I didn't, but it said authoritatively that I did. So we could check that and, you know, look for those connections. I think we're going to see, and again, I think the phrase knowledge graph is going to stay around for a while, but something like that notion is going to stay around for a while. And no single technology, no matter how good these language models get, is going to solve everything. We need to understand the relationships between things and the provenance of the content. So, and knowledge graphs are perfectly suited for that. And just a push, I'm going to be giving a talk on knowledge graphs and large language models at the Knowledge Graph Conference next week.
Yeah, then maybe ChatGPT did a prediction about the Turing Award, Deborah. No? No, that maybe it's a prediction that Deborah will win the Turing Award.
Maybe you'll still win the Turing Award.
It's a prediction. Yes. So maybe right. Yeah. So I would like to emphasize what Deborah said, and because that's what we need next. Hybrid systems. We need semantic understanding. We need knowledge bases incorporated in these models. Otherwise, we will see garbage all the time. The only way to check that something is true or not is via a knowledge graph. Now, not too many companies have a really huge knowledge graph, so that's another inequality that we need to suffer. It will be great if, say, Google will put an open knowledge graph for the people. So that's a wishful thinking.
Thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you so much to the audience. Oh, one last question. Yes, come on.
I'm just saying to Agnes,
Time is short, apparently so many.
Thanks. Question for Ricardo. If a query to a search engine now is generated by an LLM, how does the search engine architecture look like? Is an inverted index still the way to build it or not?
Well, if we use neural IR, I think it's not a classical inverted index any longer. So we need to do like similarity this measure in a space of say 700 dimensions in this kind of documents. So you can think that is similar to inverted index in the sense that now instead of words we have these representations that will change the vector space, but still cosine similarity will be for me the best way to find it. But maybe there are other ways that we can check in the future. But and one amazing thing is that they will work in any language. So similarity in that space seems to capture the latent semantics of the documents independent of the language. So I think but now we can worry about the other part, about how to get the right prompt for the search. But before we didn't know how to do that. So now I think that's solved. We need to work on what is the best prompt, and that will be another system that we can put on top of that.
Cheer.
I just have two quick sort of thoughts. One is actually building on what Ricardo said about the demise of languages that might happen. One of our colleagues at Northwestern, Viorica Marian, published an op-ed piece in the Washington Post about how the implications of that are really quite scary in some ways, because her research shows how much our way of thinking and our way of viewing the world is based upon the languages that we learn. And that diversity of languages is so important for continuing to promote diverse ways of looking at the world. And she makes the same argument that most of what we're doing with these LLMs is the 20 most prevalent languages. And already we see about 20 languages extinguishing, as she uses the term, every year. So it is something that I think that this one unintended consequence that Ricardo has said is something that is actually being studied quite extensively and by one of our colleagues in communication science and disorders and others in the world. So that's one thing. Another area which I know nothing about, but it intrigued me, is how this can affect legal issues. Because when we talk about things like copyright, Tom Malone, who is at MIT, has introduced the idea whether we need to have something called learn right as opposed to copyright. The right for AI to learn from certain data sets. And it's one of the things that I think we need to start thinking about. Does AI have the right to learn, even if it's not copying? So just to give you two examples from areas that I know almost nothing about, linguistics and legal, I wanted to throw those two ideas out.
Something very short, because you are in communication, and no one has said it. I guess if you want to see very close, scary things, in 5 years we will see a video and we don't know if it's true or not. So we cannot use it in a legal court. So the only way to have a real proof will be to have a person, not even a Zoom call, because that could be invented too. So we need only to trust people. And that would be a pity, because that changes everything how we engage today with digital media. And I'm sure that many people in your field that should be worried about that, because then confirmation bias will be incredible.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I think we have a lot of food for thought. Probably there could be many more ideas here to talk about. And if you have questions left, do approach our distinguished panelists. They will still be here. Not tonight, not tonight, but in the days to follow. Thank you so much for joining us and sticking around to the very end. We were delighted to have you. Thank you.
And thank you, Agnes, for moderating this as well.
Dear Scott.